Spring rain drummed monotonously on the eaves as Diana Brookhart sorted through work documents on the kitchen table. She had developed the habit of bringing work home while still at university, and it had only grown stronger over the years. A large mug of cold coffee stood nearby, her third of the evening. Harry Woodford watched his wife from the doorway, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed over his chest. He was annoyed by her constant busyness, the endless spreadsheets and reports. It seemed as if her work was her whole life, and everything else was just a backdrop for her career ambitions. Maybe that's enough for today. He tried to sound casual, but even he could hear the irritation in his voice. Diana looked up from her papers, squinting, nearsighted. She only wore glasses at work. I have to finish the quarterly report. The board meeting is in a week and I want to be ready. You're always ready. Harry walked over to the desk and sat down opposite her. You know, sometimes I think you work too much. And I think you don't work enough. Diana put down her pen and looked intently at her husband. Harry, how long have you been a sales manager? 4 years. What does that have to do with anything? And you're happy with that? No plans to move on? Harry grimaced. This conversation had been repeated many times before, and it always ended the same way, with mutual irritation and hurt feelings. I'm happy with my job. I have a stable job, a good salary. An average salary, Diana interrupted, and no prospects for advancement. Not everyone needs to advance, Harry snapped. Some people just need to do their job. There are different ways to do a job, Diana said, getting up and walking over to the window. The lights of a few cars flashed by outside. When we first met, you talked about starting your own business, remember? Those were dreams. The reality is that you're afraid to take risks. She turned to him. Afraid to step outside your comfort zone. And I'm tired of carrying us both. Carrying? You think I'm a burden? No, Harry. But we're stuck in a rut. I see other couples growing together, supporting each other. Oh, you mean the Martinsons? Harry stood up too. How James got a promotion thanks to his father-in-law's connections. What does that have to do with it? He wasn't afraid to take responsibility for a new project. And you... She stopped, but it was too late. What about me? Harry's voice rang with steel. Finish what you started. And you turned down the chance to head up the branch last year. You turned it down yourself because it meant starting from scratch. I didn't want to move. We could have bought a bigger house, finally had a child. Harry ran his hand hard over his face. Here we go again. So it's my fault we don't have children yet? That's not what I meant, Diana said wearily, sinking back into her chair. It's just, I'm 32, you're 35. We're stuck. You're stuck. I'm happy with my life, he said, almost syllable by syllable. Why isn't that enough? Because I know you can do more. We can do more. Harry left the kitchen silently. A minute later, the front door slammed shut. He had gone for his traditional evening run. Diana knew her husband would be back in an hour. They would eat dinner in awkward silence, and then pretend nothing had happened, just like always. She absent-mindedly twirled an antique ring on her finger, the only memento she had left of her mother. It was a thin gold band with a small sapphire, passed down through the women in her family. Her mother had said that the ring brought wisdom to its owner. Diana could have used some of her mother's wisdom right now. Returning to her documents, she tried to concentrate on the numbers, but her thoughts kept returning to her conversation with her husband. Perhaps she was really putting too much pressure on him. But was it wrong to want more for her family? Was it wrong to see potential in the person she loved, even if he refused to acknowledge it himself? Harry was late for work for the first time in a long time. After yesterday's run in the rain and a nearly sleepless night, his head felt heavy. The spacious, open-plan office greeted him with its usual hum of voices and the clatter of keyboards. Employees bustled between rows of desks with coffee mugs, and the smell of fresh pastries from the cafeteria on the first floor wafted through the air. Mindy Adams waved at him from the coffee machine. Her bright red hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she had a loose mint-colored cardigan draped over her shoulders. The office was always cool because of the air conditioning. Harry smiled involuntarily, remembering how this girl had first appeared in their sales department a year and a half ago. Back then, she had seemed lost among the strict suits and high heels, in her vintage dress and with freckles scattered across her nose. Harry had helped her settle in, shown her where everything was, and introduced her to his colleagues. Gradually, they started having lunch together, discussing work projects and sharing stories from their lives. "You look terrible," Mindy said, handing him a paper cup of coffee. "Did you fight with your wife again?" Harry gratefully accepted the hot drink. He didn't need to hide anything from Mindy. She probably knew more about his family problems than anyone else. Same old, same old. Diana thinks I'm not ambitious enough," he said, slumping wearily into his chair. "You know, sometimes I feel like she didn't marry me. She married her idea of me." Mindy sat down on the edge of his desk, swinging her delicate ankle. Her dark blue pencil skirt rode up slightly, revealing the lace edge of her stockings. "Maybe you should think about asking for a promotion. I heard there's a department head position opening up at the Western Branch." "Not you too," Harry grimaced. "I've had enough career advice." Okay, Mindy said, raising her hands in a conciliatory gesture. "You really deserve more, and I'm not talking about work." She slid off the table and headed for her seat, leaving behind a light trail of floral perfume. Harry watched her go, remembering their first candid conversation. It was 6 months ago when they had stayed late working on the quarterly report. Mindy had told him about her failed romance with a married man, and he had shared his doubts about marriage for the first time. Since then, she had become his confidant, the person he could be honest with without fear of judgment. The day dragged on endlessly. Harry tried to focus on his work, but his thoughts kept returning to yesterday's argument. Around 6 in the evening, his phone vibrated quietly. A message from Diana. "I'll be late from work. Don't wait up for dinner." "Hey, workaholic." Mindy appeared next to his desk again. "The workday's over. How about a drink? You're clearly not in the mood for a domestic dispute." Harry hesitated. On another day, he would have declined, but now the prospect of returning to an empty apartment seemed particularly bleak. "Why not?" he said, gathering his things. "Just for a little while." Frank's bar was 2 blocks from the office. It was a cozy place with dim lighting and an old-fashioned wooden bar. On Tuesdays, it was usually not very crowded, just right for a quiet conversation. They took a corner table. Mindy ordered a martini, Harry a whiskey on the rocks. They drank the first glass in silence, enjoying the opportunity to relax after a long day. "You know," Mindy finally said, running her finger thoughtfully around the rim of her glass, "sometimes I envy Diana. She has you, reliable, loyal, and she doesn't appreciate it." "Come on," Harry said with a wry smile. "I'm just a boring loser who's afraid to take risks. Isn't that right?" "Is that what she said?" Mindy leaned forward. In the dim light of the bar, her eyes seemed darker than usual. "You're not boring, Harry. You're real. In a world where everyone is obsessed with success, you remain yourself. That's worth a lot." He felt her knee brush lightly against his under the table. The accidental touch sent a wave of unexpected warmth through him. Harry quickly took a large sip of whiskey. "Another one?" Mindy suggested, a new note in her voice. Harry knew he should say no, get up, say goodbye, and go home. But instead, he raised his hand to flag down the waiter. After all, what was the harm in just sitting with a friend? Outside, dusk was falling. The bar was gradually filling up with office workers, couples, and lone regulars. Mindy was telling a funny story about her cat, and Harry found himself admiring the way she brushed her hair away from her face and wrinkled her nose childishly when she laughed. His phone vibrated again, probably Diana. Harry didn't bother to check. Harry woke up with a headache and an unfamiliar smell. Instead of the familiar scent of lavender that his bedding at home smelled like, he was surrounded by the sweet aroma of vanilla. When he opened his eyes, he didn't immediately realize where he was. The small bedroom was flooded with morning light, the sun shining through the thin curtains. On the bedside table was a photo of a smiling red-haired girl with a cat in her arms. Mindy. Memories of last night came flooding back with a wave of shame and regret. The bar, a few more cocktails, conversations about misunderstanding, loneliness, how good they were together. The taxi, her touch, the kiss in the elevator, and everything that followed. Mindy found herself in the kitchen, wearing a large t-shirt with a rock band print, frying eggs. Her hair was pulled back into a casual bun, revealing her graceful neck dotted with freckles. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she smiled without turning around. "Coffee's in the pot. I hope you like it strong." Harry froze in the doorway, not knowing how to act. His whole being was torn between the desire to run away and the need to explain something. "Mindy, listen. What happened?" "It was wonderful." She finally turned to him, holding 2 plates of breakfast in her hands. "And don't look like it's the end of the world. We're adults, aren't we?" She placed the plates on a small kitchen table and gestured for him to sit down. In the morning light, her apartment seemed cozy and somehow girlishly carefree. Bright pillows on the windowsill, a collection of magnets on the refrigerator, a bouquet of wildflowers in a vase. "I'm married," Harry said, sinking into a chair. "I know," Mindy shrugged. "So what? We're friends. Sometimes friends can comfort each other when they need to." She said it so simply and naturally, as if she were discussing the weather or plans for the weekend. No awkwardness, no demands, no promises. "I have to go." Harry pushed his untouched eggs aside. "I have to get to work." "Of course," Mindy smiled. "See you at the office, and, Harry, don't worry so much, really." When he left her house, the first thing he did was check his phone. 3 missed calls from Diana and a message. "Are you okay? You didn't tell me you weren't coming." Harry stopped at a flower shop. The saleswoman, an elderly woman with kind eyes, helped him pick out a bouquet of Diana's favorite flowers, white freesias and soft pink alstroemerias. "Did you do something wrong to your wife?" she asked knowingly as she rang up his purchase. Harry just nodded, unable to say a word. Guilt twisted his insides into a tight knot. He remembered how he had met Diana. She worked in the finance department of the same furniture factory where he had just been hired as a manager. Their first date, her laughter when he had awkwardly tried to joke, the proposal in a small Italian restaurant, the wedding, the honeymoon, 6 years of living together, 6 years of trust that he had destroyed in one night. He decided not to go to the office, sending his boss a message saying he was feeling unwell. Technically, it wasn't even a lie. He really did feel sick, just not from a cold. Diana met him in the hallway. She was wearing a strict gray suit. She was getting ready for work. Seeing the flowers, she raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What are these for?" "I want to apologize for yesterday's argument, for not warning you. I was wrong." Diana took the bouquet, buried her face in the flowers, and breathed in their scent. This simple, familiar gesture made Harry's heart ache. "I overreacted too," she finally said. "I shouldn't have pressured you about the promotion. I just really believe in you, you know?" She leaned in to kiss him, but Harry pulled away, pretending to sneeze. "Sorry. I think I really caught a cold yesterday. I don't want to give it to you." "Then go to bed," Diana said, feeling his forehead like a doctor. "I'll take my work home with me today and look after you." "No, I'll just sleep it off. I insist, she said, already reaching for her phone to call his boss. Besides, we've been meaning to talk for a while, calmly, without shouting or accusations. Harry watched her put the flowers in a vase and felt like the worst scoundrel in the world. He remembered Mindy's touch, her whisper, the smell of vanilla. He shook his head, trying to push the memories away. "I'll make some tea," Diana said, turning on the kettle. "You change your clothes. You smell like someone else's perfume." She said it casually, as if she were talking about the weather, but Harry felt as if the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. However, Diana had already turned away to the kitchen cabinets, whistling a tune. After that night, everything changed imperceptibly, like autumn leaves changing color day after day until one day you realize that the green is completely gone. Harry tried to stay away from Mindy, but office life did not encourage distance. Joint projects, memos, lunches in the cafeteria, they were always together. Mindy really acted as if nothing had happened. No hints, meaningful glances, or ambiguous phrases. Just the usual friendly conversation, maybe a little warmer than before. This naturalness was captivating and lulled him into a false sense of security. Work meetings smoothly transitioned into late nights spent working on reports. Accidental touches became a little longer. Glances became a little more intense. And then she kissed him again, in an empty conference room after a long meeting, and he responded. Now every day was divided into before and after. Before work, there was breakfast with Diana, the usual conversation about plans for the evening, and a goodbye kiss. After work, there were meetings with Mindy in small cafes on the outskirts of the city, at her apartment, and once even in a cheap motel outside the city. He learned to lie masterfully, inventing endless meetings, business trips, and corporate events. Diana began to stay late at work more often. She had been promoted to deputy chief economist, and her new position required more time. Harry was only too happy about this. Fewer excuses to make. But sometimes, looking at his wife over his morning coffee, he caught her watching him intently. "You've been acting strange lately," she remarked one day, spreading jam on her toast. "Maybe you should take a vacation. Let's go somewhere together?" "Not now." Harry hastily finished his coffee. "It's the end of the quarter. I have a lot of work to do." "You've been mentioning work a lot lately," Diana said thoughtfully, tapping the edge of her cup with a spoon. "You used to complain that everything was boring and monotonous, and now you've turned into a workaholic." There was a slight irony in her voice, but her gaze remained sharp and searching. Harry felt a chill run down his spine. "I just have some interesting projects coming up," he said, getting up from the table. "I have to go." Mindy was waiting for him at his favorite coffee shop near the office. The morning conversation with his wife had left a bad taste in his mouth, but it melted away as soon as he saw her familiar red head at the table by the window. "You have new lipstick," he remarked as he kissed her. "Do you like it?" Mindy smiled mischievously. "I picked it on purpose so it wouldn't leave a mark." It was their unspoken agreement. No obvious clues. No compromising messages or phone calls. No noticeable traces on their clothes or skin. Like children playing spies, they enjoyed their secret. Diana really did begin to notice changes in her husband. A new shirt he had previously considered too flashy for the office. A faint scent of unfamiliar perfume. A birthday gift from my colleagues. An unexpected desire to take up sports. Just decided to get in shape. She chalked it all up to his attempts to change after their argument about his career. "You know," she said one evening as they were watching a movie, "I'm glad you finally got your act together. You're taking care of yourself, paying more attention to your work." Harry said nothing, pretending to be absorbed in the screen. Diana rested her head on his shoulder and he smelled the familiar scent of lavender from her hair. His phone vibrated in his pocket, probably a message from Mindy. Two worlds, two different Harrys, the model husband and the secret lover. existed in parallel, never intersecting. But sometimes, in moments of particular closeness with Mindy or rare tenderness with Diana, he was overcome by the realization of what was happening. He was betraying not only his wife, he was betraying their shared past, all those years when they had been truly happy. He was betraying his own principles, his ideas about honesty and fidelity. In those moments, he almost decided to confess everything, or, on the contrary, to break up with Mindy. But in the morning, everything returned to normal. Breakfast with his wife, work, secret meetings, lies, more work, and an evening at home. It was a vicious circle from which he could no longer escape. And then Mindy saw Diana for the first time. She came to pick up her husband after work so they could go to her brother's birthday party together. Harry introduced them, and Mindy couldn't take her eyes off the antique sapphire ring on Diana's hand. "What a beautiful thing," she said later when they were alone. "It has so much history, so much love." Harry didn't think much of her words. He shouldn't have. The October evening was surprisingly warm. Diana was setting the table in the living room, humming to herself. The aroma of roast duck wafted through the apartment. She was cooking her grandmother's recipe. Harry watched his wife, leaning against the door frame. In the sunset light streaming through the window, she looked very young, just like the day they first met. Today they were expecting her Aunt Margaret, the only surviving member of the older generation of the family. She came once a year, always in October, always with the same blueberry pie that no one liked but everyone ate politely. This visit was a tradition that Diana held sacred. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Aunt Margaret was famous for her punctuality. A tall, thin woman with perfectly coiffed gray hair crossed the threshold, holding the familiar basket with the pie in her hands. "Diana, dear," she hugged her niece, "you're looking better and better, but Harry's lost weight. Are you feeding your husband properly?" Diana laughed. "He's on a diet, Auntie. He's decided to take care of himself." Harry kissed Aunt Margaret on the cheek, which smelled of lavender perfume, the same perfume Diana's mother used to wear. For some reason, this detail touched him deeply. At dinner, his aunt asked them about their lives, work, and plans for the future as usual. Harry answered in monosyllables, trying not to meet her gaze. For some reason, it seemed that this perceptive woman could read all his secrets in his eyes. "Do you remember, Diana," Aunt Margaret said suddenly, looking at her wine glass, "how your grandmother got this ring?" Diana mechanically touched the sapphire on her finger. "Of course. You told me that story when I was a child." "Tell Harry," Aunt Margaret said with a sly smile. "He doesn't know, does he?" "He knows part of it," Diana said, turning to her husband. "Remember I told you that the ring is passed down through the women in our family? But the story of how it came to be is really amazing." She took a sip of wine and began her story. In 1927, her great-grandmother Elizabeth worked as a maid in a wealthy household. One day, the mistress accused her of stealing an expensive sapphire ring. Elizabeth faced imprisonment, but she did not confess to something she did not do. A month later, the ring was found behind a dresser in the mistress's bedroom. The woman was so ashamed of her actions that she gave the ring to Elizabeth as compensation for the false accusation. "Since then," Diana continued, "this ring has been a symbol of honesty and fortitude in our family. My great-grandmother passed it on to her daughter, who passed it on to my mother, who passed it on to me. It's not so much expensive as it is memorable. And every woman in our family," added Aunt Margaret, "received it at a time when she most needed a reminder of family values." Harry felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He remembered Mindy's admiring gaze when she saw the ring on Diana's finger, and this morning she had talked about real feelings for the first time. "You do realize that I'm not just with you for fun, right?" she had asked when they met at their usual coffee shop. "There's something special between us, something real." He didn't say anything, but she didn't back down. We could be together for real, without all the lies and pretending. Mindy, we agreed. Agreed to what? That I'd be happy with scraps from someone else's table, sneaking around cheap cafes. Her voice sounded hurt and defiant. Now, listening to the story of the ring, Harry realized he had trapped himself. He had betrayed not just his wife, but an entire family history built on honesty and loyalty. "Are you all right, dear?" Diana's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "You've gone pale." "Yes, just impressed by the story." He forced a smile. Aunt Margaret looked at him intently over her glasses. "You know, Harry, in life we often find ourselves faced with choices. And it's not the choice we make that matters, but how we live with it afterwards." Her piercing gaze made him feel uncomfortable. It seemed as if the old woman could see right through him, read his every thought, know all his sins. That evening, after his aunt had left and Diana was doing the dishes, Harry's phone vibrated with an incoming message. Mindy had sent a photo of an antique ring. "Can you believe it? I found one almost exactly like your wife's. It's fate, isn't it?" Harry turned off his phone without replying. For the rest of the evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was making an irreparable mistake. But he no longer knew what exactly that mistake was, the affair itself, or the fact that he had allowed it to go this far. Mindy started from afar. The day after the family dinner, she met Harry at a coffee shop, unusually pensive. Instead of her usual martini, she ordered herbal tea and absent-mindedly traced the rim of the cup with her finger. Her freckles seemed paler than usual against her light makeup, as if she hadn't slept well. "You know," she finally said, looking past Harry, "I've been thinking about that ring all night, about its history. Can you imagine what an amazing thing it is? A piece of jewelry that has survived so many generations, so many stories." Harry said nothing, taking a sip of his cold coffee. After yesterday's conversation with Aunt Margaret, the subject of the ring made him feel vaguely uneasy. "I don't have anything like that," Mindy continued. "No family heirlooms, no beautiful stories. My mom was a waitress, always working 2 jobs. My dad, well, I don't even remember him." It was true. Harry knew about Mindy's difficult childhood. She rarely talked about it, but when she did, her voice would grow quiet and her eyes would darken like a stormy sky. "Sometimes I imagine how nice it would be to have something real, something that would connect me to the past, to real feelings." She fell silent, fingering the napkin. Outside the window, a light rain was falling, turning the street into a blur of yellow streetlights and gray buildings. A jazz tune played in the coffee shop, and the waitress wiped the tables, preparing to close. "Mindy?" Harry covered her hand with his. "You know I can't—" "Can't what?" She looked up at him with a childlike hurt in her eyes. "Can't make me feel special. Real? You are special." "Really?" She smiled bitterly. "Then why do I feel like a second-rate person? Why do I have to hide, settle for crumbs of your attention?" Harry grimaced. These conversations had become more frequent lately, growing increasingly emotional. Mindy seemed to be deliberately rubbing salt in the wound, making him feel guilty. "I saw her wearing that ring," Mindy continued after a pause, "so casually, as if it meant nothing, just a habitual accessory. But to me, it would mean everything." She took out her phone and showed him a photo of an antique ring. "Look, I found one that's similar, but it costs a fortune. And even so, it's not the same. Not the same story, not the same energy." The rain intensified, drumming on the glass. Harry watched the drops gather into intricate patterns and felt a dull irritation growing inside him. "What do you want, Mindy?" "I want to be the only one," she said quietly but firmly. "I want you to make a choice, a real choice. I'm married. So what? You're unhappy in your marriage. We both know that. Diana doesn't understand you. She doesn't appreciate you. Remember how she calls you a loser, how she pressures you about your career. She never called me a loser. No? What do you call her constant dissatisfaction with your job, with your position? She wants to change you, to make you a different person, but I love you just the way you are. Mindy moved closer, her perfume. She was now wearing a more expensive fragrance, enveloping Harry in a familiar warmth. Imagine how symbolic it would be, she whispered. You give me a ring that symbolizes true love, not the familiar kind with Diana, but ours, lively, passionate. You're talking about theft, Harry said, pulling away. I'm talking about choice. Mindy shook her head. About finally being happy. Don't you want that? She fell silent, giving him time to digest what she had said. Then she took a small box out of her purse. Remember the night we first got together? I kept the cuff link you lost. I've kept it as a talisman. Harry looked at the familiar silver cufflink, a gift from Diana on their first anniversary, and felt reality crumbling around him. It's time to take a decisive step, Mindy said, putting the box back in her purse. Prove to yourself and to me that this isn't just a fling, that you're capable of real commitment. She stood up, leaving the money for the tea on the table. Think about it. About us. About what you really want. Harry sat in the coffee shop for another hour after she left. Fragments of phrases swirled in his head, about real feelings, about choices, about happiness. He could see Diana's face when she told him the story of the ring, and for some reason, he could see Aunt Margaret's piercing gaze. He got home late. Diana was already asleep, a book lying on the bedside table, and the ill-fated ring glinting in the moonlight on her hand. Harry stared at it for a long time before going to bed. That night he had some disturbing dreams, but in the morning he couldn't remember them. 3 days later, Mindy invited him to dinner at her place. She was unusually serious, talking about the future and how tired she was of hiding. Then she took out the cufflink and threw it in the trash can. Choose, she said. Either we start a new life or we end this charade. I don't want to be a mistress anymore. And Harry realized that he was cornered, that every decision he made would be wrong, that, in fact, there was no choice left. The night was muggy, despite it being mid-October. Diana lay in bed, listening to her husband's quiet breathing. She couldn't sleep. Sleep had become a rare visitor in recent weeks. In the darkness, the sapphire on her antique ring glimmered faintly. She never took it off, not even in her sleep. It was more than just jewelry. It was a piece of family history that she had sworn to keep safe. Harry stirred and she closed her eyes, evening her breathing. She had learned this trick as a child, pretending to be asleep when her parents looked into her room. Now that skill came in handy again. She could feel her husband's every movement. He lifted himself carefully, paused for a few seconds, listening. His breathing quickened, became shallow. The mattress springs creaked. He was standing up, a few steps to her side of the bed. Diana continued to breathe evenly, although her heart was pounding in her throat. She knew what was going to happen. She had been waiting for this since the day she noticed Mindy's greedy gaze on the ring. That was when Diana first realized that her husband's affair was not just a passing infatuation, that this woman wanted more. There was a soft sound as Harry's fingers touched her hand. A pause. Another touch, more confident. He gently pulled the ring. Diana felt the cool metal slide across her skin. She turned her head slightly, pretending it was just a movement in her sleep. Streetlights shone through the loosely drawn curtains, and she could make out her husband's silhouette. His hand trembled as he finally took the ring. Diana could almost physically feel his hesitation, his inner struggle. But he did it anyway. He took the only thing that was truly dear to her. She lay still as Harry tiptoed back to his side of the bed. His breathing gradually evened out, but she knew he wasn't asleep. He was probably replaying his actions in his head, maybe even feeling remorse. A car drove past outside, its headlights illuminating the room for a second. Diana stared at the ceiling with her eyes wide open. Inside, she felt empty and strangely calm. There was no anger, no hysteria, just crystal clear understanding. She remembered their first meeting, a young sales manager, charmingly awkward in his attempts to attract her attention. Their first date, when he apologized for being late for half an hour, and then it turned out that she had mixed up the time. The proposal in a small Italian restaurant. He was so nervous that he knocked over a glass of wine. 6 years of marriage, not cloudless, but honest. At least, that's what she thought. A conversation with Aunt Margaret came to mind. Every woman in our family received this ring at a time when she most needed a reminder of family values. Well, it seemed that the time had come to see if she was worthy of being part of this tradition. The plan formed itself, clear and simple, like a mathematical formula. No drama, no hysterics, no accusations. Just calm, measured steps. She was an economist. She knew how to work with numbers and facts, not emotions. In the morning, she would get up as usual, make breakfast, and smile at her husband. Then she will call work and take the day off. She has enough days saved up. When Harry leaves, she will methodically gather all his things. His suits from the closet, his favorite cufflinks from the jewelry box, his electric razor from the bathroom, his vinyl record collection from the living room. She would pack everything into suitcases and bags and neatly arrange them by the front door. Then she would sit down in an armchair and wait for him to return, smiling that smile she had inherited from her mother, calm and slightly mocking, the smile of a woman who knows her own worth. Diana turned on her side, feeling the tension slowly leave her body. Somewhere in her solar plexus, a strange feeling arose, not resentment, not anger, but something like gratitude. Gratitude that everything had finally become clear, for no longer having to pretend not to notice the obvious. She remembered her grandmother's words. The ring never goes to a random person. It chooses for itself who to reveal the true face of loved ones to and when. Well, she had passed the test. She hadn't lost her temper, made a scene, begged, or clung to the past. Now all she had to do was wait for morning and smile, definitely smile. Breakfast began as usual. Diana made eggs and bacon, toast, and brewed coffee in a Turkish coffee pot, just as her mother had taught her. Harry looked a little tense, awkwardly hiding his hands under the table. "Are you staying late today?" she asked, spreading jam on her toast. "No, I think I'll be home for lunch," he said, looking away. When the door closed behind him, Diana sat motionless for a while. Then she took out her phone, called her boss, and took the day off. She had enough days saved up. She spent the next few hours methodically packing her husband's things. Suitcases and bags gradually lined up in neat rows in the hallway. Everything was neatly folded. Suits in covers, shoes in separate boxes, books in sturdy cardboard boxes. She even took the trouble to make a list of the contents of each bag and tape it to the top. By the time Harry returned, she had changed into a strict sea green dress, done her hair and makeup perfectly. She sat down in the kitchen with her third cup of coffee. When he entered, he froze in the kitchen doorway, looking confused at the collected belongings. "Coffee?" Diana smiled, noticing how he mechanically hid his hands in his pockets. Harry nodded silently, looking warily at his wife. She looked unusual in her strict dress, with her hair perfectly styled and her makeup flawless. Usually at this time of day, she wore a housecoat with her hair pulled back in a careless bun. "Sit down," Diana said, placing a cup in front of him. "We need to talk." "About what?" His voice sounded hoarse. "About your things in the hall. About Mindy. About the ring you stole last night." Harry flinched as if he had been slapped. "You haven't been sleeping?" "Of course not," she said, taking a sip of coffee. "Just like the last few weeks." You know, insomnia is an amazing thing. It gives you a lot of time to think, to analyze, to draw conclusions. She took several sheets of paper out of a folder. Here's a list of your things by bag. Please check that everything is there. If I've forgotten anything, let me know and I'll add it. Diana. And another thing, she continued as if she hadn't heard him. I've drawn up a preliminary agreement on the division of property. I'll keep the apartment. It was bought with the money from the sale of my mother's property. You can take the car. It's registered in your name. Harry looked at his wife, not recognizing her. Where was the emotional woman who could cry over a sad movie? Who got angry if he forgot to call? Sitting in front of him was a beautifully dressed, completely unfamiliar person. I can explain everything, he began. Don't bother. Diana raised her hand, stopping him. Really, don't. I understood everything back then, in the office, when I saw how she looked at you, and then at my ring. It's not what you think. No? She looked him straight in the eye for the first time. So you haven't slept with her for the last 2 months? You didn't meet her at that coffee shop on Oak Street? You didn't take off my family ring last night to give it to her? Each of her questions was like a punch in the gut. Harry felt cold sweat running down his back. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to see how far you would go, Diana shrugged. And you know what? You exceeded all my expectations. Stealing a ring that has been in the family for 3 generations. That's a special kind of betrayal, don't you think? She stood up and straightened her dress. You have 15 minutes to check your things and take them with you. I called a locksmith to change the locks. You can leave the keys on the table. Wait. Harry grabbed her hand. Let's talk. I'll fix everything. There's nothing to fix, she said softly but firmly, pulling her hand away. Everything has already been done. By the way, you can keep the ring. Consider it a parting gift, a reminder of how you destroyed a 6-year marriage for a woman who doesn't even know its true value. Diana left the kitchen, leaving Harry alone with his cooling coffee and a stack of documents. The ring weighed heavily in his pants pocket. Harry took it out and held it up to the light. It was a simple silver ring with a small sapphire, nothing special at first glance. But now he saw something else in it: family history, tradition, trust, everything he had betrayed that night. You know, she said, pausing in the doorway, I'm actually grateful to you. You showed me that I'm stronger than I thought, and that some traditions are worth breaking in order to start new ones. With those words, she left, leaving him alone in the apartment that had been their home just yesterday. 15 minutes later, as he was loading his belongings into a taxi, the key turned in the lock. A locksmith had arrived to change the locks. Harry didn't wait for him to finish. Frank's coffee shop greeted Harry with an unusual silence. At 2 in the afternoon, it was almost empty. He chose a table in the corner, away from the windows. The ring in his jacket pocket felt heavy as lead. Mindy was 20 minutes late. She looked different than usual, a strict business suit instead of her usual romantic dresses, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. There was no trace of her usual softness. Sorry I'm late, she said, sitting down across from him without even looking at him. I have an important meeting in an hour. Meeting? Harry looked at his watch in confusion. You knew I wanted to talk. About what? Mindy took out a mirror and touched up her lipstick. About your wife kicking you out of the house, or about you finally deciding to steal her ring. There was a new tone in her voice, cold, businesslike. It was as if they were discussing the terms of a contract rather than their relationship. I did it for you. Harry took out the ring. You said, God, did you really do that? She laughed, and the sound sent a chill through him. I thought you'd just buy something similar, or find an antique. The waitress brought her usual martini. Mindy took a sip, staring at the ring on the table. You know, she finally looked up. When I found out that a new sales manager had joined our company, I did some background checks. Married, no ambition, stuck in the same position, but his wife has a good job with good prospects. I thought, why not? What are you talking about? About your career, Harry. About opportunities. You see, next month the sales manager position is opening up. And guess who the top candidate is? She smiled, and there was nothing of the sweet, understanding Mindy he knew in that smile. Or thought he knew. You used me, he said. And it didn't sound like a question. Used is too strong a word. Let's just say I created a situation where everyone got what they wanted. You got your thrill and your escape from your boring family life. I got my reputation as someone who can influence things. Influence. You destroyed my marriage. No, dear, Mindy finished her martini. You destroyed it yourself. I just pushed the first domino. She stood up, adjusting her jacket. By the way, you can keep the ring. It's too vintage for my style. Besides, why would I want a family heirloom from someone I barely know? Barely know me? Harry felt nausea rising in his throat. We slept together. You said you loved me. Oh, Harry, she patted him condescendingly on the shoulder. Did you really think a young, ambitious woman could seriously fall for someone like you? It was sweet, really, but it's time to get back to reality. She picked up her purse. And don't worry about work. I'll put in a good word for you. Maybe you won't even get fired. After all, you did me an invaluable service. Harry sat watching her until she disappeared through the door. Then he slowly picked up the ring and held it up to the light. A simple silver ring with a small sapphire. A symbol of honor, tradition, and trust. Everything he had betrayed for a woman for whom it was just a move in a career game. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from the friend he was staying with. Something about his things and keys. Harry didn't bother to read it. Instead, he ordered a whiskey, the first he had ever had in broad daylight. The waitress gave him a sympathetic look. She had probably seen similar scenes many times before. Somewhere else in the city, Mindy was already entering the sales director's office, rehearsing her best business smile. And in a small apartment, a locksmith was finishing changing the locks while Diana methodically deleted their photos from their albums. A domino effect, Harry thought. One small decision, and everything falls apart, one piece at a time. Harry stood at Mindy's door, still clutching the ring in his pocket. In his other hand, he held a small bag with the bare essentials. The rest of his belongings were still in the taxi outside. After what had happened that morning, he was sure of only one thing. They would definitely take him in here. Mindy didn't open the door right away. She looked unusually homey. In a simple dress, her hair casually pulled back, without her usual makeup. A slight surprise flashed across her face. Harry, I thought we were meeting tonight. I left Diana, he said, stepping over the threshold. Or rather, she kicked me out. She knew about the ring, Mindy. She didn't sleep last night. The ring? Something changed in her voice. The one? Harry took the silver jewelry out of his pocket. In the daylight streaming through the window, the sapphire looked dull, almost lifeless. God, did you really do that? She laughed, and the sound sent a chill through him. I thought you'd just buy something similar, or find an antique. But you wanted this ring. You said family history was important. Harry, honey. Mindy took the ring between two fingers as if it were some trinket from a souvenir shop. I meant a similar ring, with a similar history. You don't have to take everything so literally. She walked over to the dressing table, where a large jewelry box stood. She tossed the ring into it carelessly, without even trying it on. You don't even want to try it on. Maybe later, she shrugged. It doesn't go with what I'm wearing right now. Besides, I have a meeting with the sales director in an hour to discuss the quarterly report. Harry looked at the ring, lost among the shiny jewelry, and felt a strange feeling growing inside him. He remembered Diana's face when she told him the story of the ring, her pride in the family tradition, her belief in honesty and loyalty. "Don't just stand there," Mindy said, lightly touching his shoulder. "Make yourself comfortable. You can put your things in the guest room for now. We'll figure something out for your housing situation tonight." She was already standing in front of the mirror, touching up her makeup. Her business suit was ready. "By the way," she added without turning around, "it's better not to talk about our relationship at work for now. You understand. Reputation, career. I'm planning to get a promotion next quarter." Harry nodded, still looking at the box with the ring. For some reason, he remembered Diana's words about how some things have real value and some things only appear to have value. It seemed that now he was beginning to understand what she meant. Mindy was already getting ready, humming something to herself. For her, it was a normal day. No drama, no complications. Just another step in her career game. And he stood in the middle of a stranger's apartment with a suitcase in his hand and wondered for the first time, what if all this time he had just been a pawn in this game? A pawn that had made its move and now what? But there was nowhere to go. So he went to unpack his things in the guest room, trying not to think about how Mindy had changed now that she had gotten what she wanted. Harry's first day at work after moving in with Mindy was particularly difficult. Everything was the same at the office. The same faces, the same conversations at the coffee machine, the familiar clatter of keyboards. But something had changed imperceptibly. He noticed how conversations stopped when he appeared, how the women in the department whispered to each other, casting sidelong glances at him. By lunchtime, it was clear that everyone knew. About his affair with Mindy, about his breakup with his wife, about the fact that he was now living with his mistress. In the small office world, news spread at the speed of light. Janet from accounting, who always greeted him first, now turned away demonstratively. Mark, with whom he sometimes had lunch, found some excuse to decline today. Even the cleaning lady looked at him with disapproval. Mindy acted as if nothing had happened at work. She had the same sweet smile and touched him lightly when they passed each other. But now Harry noticed a certain insincerity in her behavior, as if she were playing a role in a play where he was the only audience member. In the evening, when most of the employees had left, he went into her office. "We need to talk about the ring." "What about?" She didn't even look up from her monitor. "You know what I'm talking about. Diana's ring. I want it back." "Why?" Mindy finally looked at him. "She won't take it back. Not after what you did. That doesn't matter, it belongs to her family." "Honey," she smiled, her new condescending smile, "you stole it yourself. You brought it to me. Now it's my ring, the one you don't even wear." "I'll wear it when I feel like it," she returned to her work. "Now excuse me, I have an important report to finish." On the way home, now Mindy's apartment was his home, Harry remembered how everyone had looked at him today. With pity, with contempt, with condemnation. He used to be a respected employee, a reliable colleague. Now he was the one who had left his wife for a young career woman. The familiar emptiness greeted him in Mindy's apartment. She often stayed late at work, saying she was preparing for a promotion. Harry went into the bedroom, where a jewelry box stood on the dressing table. The ring lay at the bottom, untouched, forgotten. He reached out to take it, but at that moment the front door slammed shut. "Don't even think about it." Mindy's voice sounded unexpectedly cold. "I knew you'd try to do that. You don't even like it. That's not the point." She walked into the room and slammed the box shut. "It's the principle. You made your choice, Harry. Now live with it." "It wasn't a choice. You manipulated me." "Really?" she laughed. "You're a grown man. You took the ring off your sleeping wife's finger yourself. You brought it to me yourself. And now you're trying to blame me?" There was truth in her words, which only made it worse. He really had done it himself. Every step, every decision, it was all his own choice. "By the way," Mindy added more softly, "I'd be more worried about your job if I were you. There are rumors of layoffs. She said it casually, as if she were talking about the weather. But Harry suddenly realized that this wasn't just information. It was a warning, or a threat. He spent the evening in the guest room, listening to Mindy talk on the phone in the next room. She laughed, discussed some work issues, made plans. Her voice sounded completely different than before, more confident, more harsh. Or maybe he just hadn't noticed those tones before. That night he dreamed about Diana. She was standing by the window of their bedroom, twirling her wedding ring in her hands. "Some things have real value," she said, "and some have only the appearance of value." He woke up in a cold sweat. Dawn was breaking outside, and somewhere in the kitchen Mindy was making coffee, humming some trendy tune. The new day promised to be just like the previous one, full of sidelong glances, whispers behind his back, and the realization that there was no turning back. Diana didn't like reading corporate newsletters, but this time she lingered over the news about a vacancy for chief economist at the company's Seattle branch. The former head was retiring, and management was looking for someone who could not only keep the books but also completely reorganize the department. She sent her resume that same evening. The interview was conducted via video link and lasted 3 hours, with detailed questions about her vision for the company's development, new methods of data analysis, and cost optimization strategies. Diana spoke clearly and confidently, as if she had been preparing for this conversation her entire life. A week later, she received an invitation to a personal meeting in Seattle. The company took care of everything: plane tickets, hotel reservations. The city greeted her with drizzling rain and a cool breeze from the bay. She liked this weather. It felt fresh, like a chance to start over. She sent the divorce papers to Harry by courier. A short letter, a detailed inventory of property, clear terms of division, no emotions, just facts and figures. She knew he would sign without looking, and that's how it turned out. The move took only 2 weeks. She sold her apartment through an agency, quickly, slightly below market price, but she didn't care. Her belongings fit into 4 large boxes. It's amazing how few truly important things remain in your life when you decide to start over. In Seattle, she rented a small apartment with a view of the bay. In the mornings, she liked to sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake up. Everything was different here: the air, the people, the rhythm of life. No one knew her story, looked at her with pity, tried to comfort her or give her advice. The job turned out to be exactly what she wanted: challenging and demanding. Diana spent 12 hours a day at the office, reorganizing the accounting system, implementing new methods, and training staff. Her team of 6 young professionals was initially wary of their new boss, but they quickly came to appreciate her professionalism. Sometimes in the evenings, when there was a little less work, she would walk along the embankment. The wind from the bay ruffled her hair, seagulls cried overhead, and the finger where her ring used to be no longer ached with phantom pain. Diana had learned to look at her past calmly, as if it were a book she had read long ago. A letter from Harry arrived a month after she moved, long, confusing, full of apologies and regrets. She read it over lunch, between reviewing quarterly reports and meeting with contractors. She folded it neatly, put it in a folder with her divorce papers, and never looked at it again. On Friday evening, Aunt Margaret called, the only person Diana had kept in touch with from her former life. "How are you, my girl?" "I'm fine, Auntie." "Really, I am." It was true. The past was in the past, with all its drama, betrayal, and pain. A new life lay ahead, and she was going to live it on her own terms. After talking to her aunt, Diana stood at the window for a long time. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her face, calm, a little tired but happy. The woman looking back at her knew her own worth, and that price did not depend on family heirlooms or the actions of others. On Monday, the office was buzzing like a beehive. A new sales manager was being introduced. Andrew Kowalski, 35 years old with experience in large companies and a reputation as a tough but effective manager. Harry watched Mindy flirt with the new boss. Light touches, attentive glances, quiet laughter at his jokes, all the same tricks she had once used on him. Now they seemed so obvious. Mindy was staying late at work more and more often. New project, urgent reports, important presentation. The excuses sounded familiar. Harry silently gathered his things from her apartment, putting them in the same bag he had brought with him after leaving Diana. The denouement came on Thursday. Mindy came home later than usual, smelling of unfamiliar perfume. "We need to talk," she said, going into the kitchen and pouring herself a glass of wine. "I think you should move out." "Because of Kowalski? What does that have to do with it?" She shrugged. "Our relationship has run its course. You can see that yourself." Harry looked at her. Her flawless makeup, her new blouse, her confident gaze. Just 2 months ago, he had destroyed his marriage for this woman. "What about the ring?" "What ring?" She frowned. "Oh, the old one? No idea. Probably lost it while cleaning." He knew it was a lie, but what did it matter now? "When do I need to vacate the apartment?" "By the weekend would be good." Mindy finished her wine. "And yes, let's keep things professional at work. I don't want any unnecessary conversations." A week later, Harry saw her with Kowalski at a restaurant across the street from the office. A new ring sparkled on her finger, a large diamond obviously expensive. She was talking animatedly, touching her new boss's hand and laughing, the same laugh that had once been meant only for him. After talking to Mindy, Harry spent his last night at her apartment. He hardly slept, listening to her breathing evenly in the next room. The sound used to calm him, but now it only caused a dull irritation. In the morning, she took longer than usual to get ready for work, choosing jewelry, scrutinizing her lipstick, and changing her blouse several times. Harry knew it was all for Kowalski, but he felt nothing but exhaustion. "Leave the keys on the table," Mindy said as she left. She smelled of new perfume, more expensive, more aggressive. When the door closed behind her, Harry began to gather his things. There was surprisingly little, as if in 2 months he had never really settled in here. Books, clothes, laptop, documents, everything fit into 2 bags. In the bedroom, his attention was drawn to a jewelry box. It was the same one Mindy had carelessly thrown Diana's ring into on the day he arrived. He knew he shouldn't open it, but his hand reached for the lid. Inside was a carefully arranged mess. Mindy always knew how to create the appearance of carelessness. Expensive earrings were mixed with cheap costume jewelry, gold chains, hairpins, and brooches. The ring was at the bottom, wrapped in a paper napkin. The silver had tarnished, and the sapphire had lost its luster. Mindy hadn't even bothered to store it properly. Harry put the ring in his pocket, not feeling like a thief. Quite the opposite, in fact. It was as if he was correcting a long-standing mistake. That evening, an official notice of redundancy appeared in his work email. The wording was impeccable. Staff optimization, department reorganization. 3 weeks to hand over his duties. Compensation in accordance with his employment contract. He didn't even bother to read to the end. It was obvious who was behind it. Finding Diana's current address proved difficult. She had changed all her contact details after moving. His former colleagues were reluctant to share information, but gradually the picture emerged. Seattle, chief economist at a branch of the company, a successful career. Harry wrote to her work email, "I want to return what belongs to your family. Can we meet?" Every day he checked his email, hoping for a reply. He continued to go to work. He had to hand over his duties to a new employee. He saw how Mindy blossomed alongside Kowalski, how her style changed, more expensive, more confident. Now she wore only designer clothes, as if trying on a new life. Diana's reply came 2 days later, short and to the point. "There's no need. Give the ring to my Aunt Margaret." Aunt Margaret still lived in the same old house on a quiet street. Harry remembered how he and Diana used to come here for Sunday dinners, how they drank tea in the small kitchen, how his aunt told family stories. Now it all seemed like scenes from someone else's movie. She opened the door and looked at him silently, without judgment but without warmth either. Her gaze showed understanding. She knew why he had come. "I brought the ring," he said, holding out the small box he had bought especially for this occasion. "It belongs to your family." Aunt Margaret nodded, took the box, but did not invite him in. He knew he had long since lost the right to cross the threshold of this house. "How is she?" he asked anyway. "She's fine." His aunt hesitated slightly. "She has a new life. Don't try to get back into it." The door closed. Harry descended the stairs, feeling strangely light, as if returning the ring had ended a chapter of his life. An unsuccessful, shameful chapter. At home, now a rented room in the suburbs, he opened his laptop and started looking at job listings. The text of his resignation letter was already written, concise, without unnecessary explanations. Several companies responded to his resume and scheduled interviews. He woke up earlier than usual that morning. A new day lay ahead, without a job, without Mindy, without illusions. There was only one thing left to do: start over, just like Diana had done. Somewhere in Seattle, she was probably sitting in her office working on important projects. And maybe she wasn't even thinking about the ring that had returned to her family, just as it should have been from the beginning. In his jacket pocket was an invitation to an interview at a small company in another state. Maybe he should leave too. Start with a clean slate, far away from everything that reminded him of his past mistakes. North Carolina welcomed autumn with a riot of colors. Harry parked his used Ford outside a small office building where he had been working for the past 8 months as a sales manager for a company that sold building materials. The job was easier than his previous one. The pay was lower, but he was fine with that. No corporate politics, no intrigue, no complicated relationships. A new city, new people. His colleagues knew him as a quiet, somewhat reserved man who did his job well and wasn't looking for a promotion. He didn't talk about his past, and no one asked. During his lunch break, Harry browsed the construction industry news. He had kept up the habit of staying informed. An article caught his eye about a major contract signed by the Seattle branch of his former company. A familiar name flashed in the comments section. Diana Brookhart, chief economist, was discussing the project's financial strategy. The photo was recent: a strict suit, a confident posture, a calm smile. She had changed, or maybe she just looked more like her true self. The phone on the table rang. A client wanted to discuss the delivery of materials for a new shopping center. Harry immersed himself in his work, habitually juggling numbers and contract terms. By evening, the deal was closed. Small by the standards of his former company, but here it was, considered a good result. At home, now his home was a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. He turned on the news. There was a story about business development on the West Coast. Among other things, they mentioned the contract he had read about that afternoon. The camera caught Diana shaking hands with some businessman. A ring glinted on her ring finger, but not the old one, a new one, her own. Dining alone, Harry thought back over the last year. After returning the ring to Aunt Margaret, he left almost immediately. He couldn't stay in a city where every corner reminded him of his mistakes. He never saw Mindy again, although he sometimes came across photos from corporate events online. She was now Kowalski's assistant and seemed to be getting married. His new life was simpler, calmer. No ambitions, no complicated schemes. Work in the morning, books or movies in the evening. On weekends, he sometimes went out of town, wandered along forest paths, and photographed nature. He had recently signed up for sailing lessons. The sea had always attracted him, but he hadn't had time before. On Friday evening, his mother called. She was the only one who knew his new address. "How are you, son?" "Fine, Mom. Working." "And your personal life?" "Not there yet." She sighed but didn't press the issue. After his divorce from Diana, their relationship had grown closer, perhaps because he now understood the price of his mistakes better. On Saturday morning, Harry went to his local coffee shop, the only habit he had kept from his former life. The barista already knew his order, an Americano without sugar and a fresh croissant. Opening the newspaper, Harry came across another article about the Seattle contract. Diana gave a detailed interview, talking about her plans for the branch's development. Between the lines, it was clear that she was in her element and knew what she wanted. In the evening, he sat on the balcony for a long time, looking at the city lights. Somewhere out there, on the other coast, Diana was probably looking at the lights too, only of a different city, a different life. A life she had built for herself, without looking back at the past. The alarm clock reminded him of his meeting with the real estate agent. Harry was thinking of buying a small house instead of renting an apartment. It was time to put down roots and learn to live again, not as brightly or ambitiously as Diana, but in his own way. Honestly. On the bedside table lay a photo from his business school graduation, the only thing he had kept from his past life. Very young faces, smiles, plans for the future. Back then, it seemed that anything was possible, if only you wanted it enough. Now he knew that it wasn't what you wanted that mattered, but what you were willing to pay for it. By nightfall, it had started to rain, a soft autumn rain that washed the dust from the streets. Harry fell asleep to the sound of the rain, thinking that tomorrow would be a new day, and maybe a new chapter in his own work on his mistakes.